From this year's legislative session to his own first year in office, I sit down one-on-one with State Representative Marvin Pendarvis for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores, or listen to this interview later on the free iHeartRadio app. Representative Pendarvis.
What's going on, Quintin? It's always good to be with you, my friend.
Likewise. Well, there's a lot going on. Let me take you to affordable housing.
Yes, sir.
I understand there's going to be a better deal on affordable housing, a town hall discussion coming up soon, Monday, June 18th, with you and Congressman Clyburn and Keith and a couple other people.
Right.
What is that better deal when it comes to affordable housing?
So I'll tell you, one of the main things that I ran on when I got elected was about addressing the affordable housing crisis that we have here in Charleston. And fortunately, what I was able to do in my first year in the General Assembly, with the help of Senator Quintin, Representative Wendell Gilliard, David Mack, and several others, is at least get some momentum on an inclusionary zoning bill that we believe would be the linchpin and the starting that really got us toward addressing our affordable housing crisis. And so, although that bill ultimately failed, what it did was, I believe, it rebirthed the conversation in the General Assembly. And as we turn toward 2019 and look at what we need to do in this off session to really get ready for it, I believe it lends itself to us being able to have those conversations with our colleagues across the aisle about innovative ways we can make the bill workable, something that will be able to, I believe, pass the House and then ultimately the Senate. So that's encouraging. I say all that to say it's clear that we've got a crisis going on, not only in the state, but across the country. And I'm thankful that Representative Clyburn saw fit that he wanted to do it in North Charleston, which is the heart of my district, and allow me to be part of the panel to talk about what we can do in order to really address this crisis. Now, I know the impetus behind him wanting to do the town hall, which goes to the affordability piece, is that the New York Times released a report several months ago that talked about evictions in the United States of America. And when they did that report, they ranked cities based off of their eviction rates. And North Charleston came in number 1. And we also had another city in South Carolina, Columbia, came in number 8, I believe. Right. So you're talking about 2 cities in South Carolina that come in the top 10, and one of them is the first in the eviction rates. And that goes toward the affordability piece, right? You've got people, not only just home ownership, and dealing with the fact that people who are working and living in Charleston aren't able to really live in any neighborhoods that are close to their jobs, and the prices of housing are rising astronomically to the point that these people can't even afford to really live, and they're spending almost more than half their income on housing, which is very unfortunate. And that's something that we need to do something about. But then even on the rental piece, for people who do rent, right, you look at rental in Charleston and in North Charleston. I mean, it's sky high. And that goes to evictions because it creates the conversation, and that's something that I've been doing in this off session. I've had some conversations with people from Sue Berkowitz, with Appleseed. I had some conversations with some other organizations dealing with what can we do with the eviction. Because as I read, and I practice law, and I've done some landlord-tenant cases before, and so I've appeared before these magistrates. And I understand the process and what oftentimes these tenants are going through. And many times, in South Carolina code it says that the landlord is supposed to make sure they're doing everything that they can to provide for the welfare and health and well-being of their tenant. And so but their responsibilities are, statutory responsibilities, they must make sure they can maintain and do everything to upkeep the property to ensure that if you're living there, you are not living in an environment that's going to be detrimental to your own health, to your own well-being. Now, what you've seen in North Charleston oftentimes are these slumlords who just rent out these places. They don't do anything to upkeep them. You've got mildew, you've got mildew, you've got holes in the walls, you've got doors falling off the hinges, You've got rodents running around, and they do everything they can to, or they don't do anything to repair it. And so these tenants are paying all this money in rent, $700, $800, $900, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 in rent. You're doing nothing to remedy the problems that these tenants are enduring throughout their tenure in that spot. And then you're expecting them to pay rent every month. And so, of course, they have an obligation to pay rent, so they're doing that. And then what you've got is these tenants who say, you know what, enough of this. They decided that they're not going to pay anymore, or they may run into an issue and they're unable to pay, and yet these landlords still want to send them to court. Because in South Carolina, what you can do is you write a certified letter to the landlord, basically saying you need to do your job and make sure you keep this property up to date. And then if they don't reply, then at that point, you can go ahead and leave, and at least it won't be an eviction on the record. But you can't withhold rent in South Carolina. And you can't offset the rent with, as I say, that I had an issue and I needed to repair some doors, or I needed to fix a leak, or I needed to do something with the mold. It's not like I can use the cost that I have to put toward it to offset it. Because sometimes these tenants can't wait on landlords to just come in and do what they're already supposed to be doing, because there's lives at stake, right? They have young children. They can't live in these environments. And then oftentimes there's a waiting list.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not like you can just go out and get an apartment or get any rental space just like that. I mean, it may take a month, 2 months, 3 months before you even get in another place. And then the place you're at, the landlord's not doing their job. It puts them in a very precarious situation. And so I believe, that's the reason why Congressman Clyburn decided, we're going to come down here. We need to address this problem in North Charleston. It's, it's the leader in the nation when it comes to these eviction rates. We need to evaluate what we can do. And I know I'm going to be proposing some solutions myself. In fact, I've already am working with a number of organizations to put together a package of some things that I believe we can do to bring forth some meaningful reform, that I believe will do something about the eviction, that I believe will do something about the rising housing prices in the Charleston area. And it all goes back to the affordability piece. It's an important part. We want people to come here, but they got to be able to afford to live here, whether you own or whether you rent. And you've got to be able to be in conditions that are going to allow you to live the best life as possible. And so we have an obligation as leaders, as representatives, to go ahead and do what we can do in our capacities to push forward legislation, meaningful legislation, to address those issues. So I'm excited about the forum. I'm excited to be on it. I'm thankful for Congressman Clyburn's office for extending the invitation to me, and I certainly encourage not only my constituents but everybody in North Charleston and the surrounding areas to come out and be part of that and let this be the beginning of what leads us into next year and ultimately seeing some real change about this.
And you talk about real change. Let me talk to you about another problem that's really growing here in town, according to a lot of people, and that is public transportation. Where are we with this discussion?
Well, public transportation, if you followed me lately, it's something that I've been on a beating path with. I've been working with William Hamilton, best friends of Low Country Transit. And we know that in Charleston, as we continue to grow in this county, we're going to see the ever-increasing need for us to be connected. And connected in our highways, and also be connected by our transportation. Now, the reason that is several years ago, there was a referendum that was put forth, and actually a tax that was put, the sales tax, that basically dealt with whether we were going to allow certain monies to go toward building what has been put forth as the bus rapid transit.
Right.
And what that is essentially is a line, and it's something that's seen an increase in popularity across the world, really. But there are a number of major cities that are doing it, and the idea is to be able to connect Somerville to downtown Charleston with several stops along the way to allow citizens to be able to just travel back and forth. And that's an important piece of the transportation part, right? Because we know that our major highway, Interstate 26, they're doing some work on that, but there's not going to be any kind of, I think they're expanding some of the lanes on each of them. Well, actually, that's on 526. So on 26, there's not much work to be done. right? Not going into North Charleston. And the Interstate 526, depending on where you're at on the debate, we're still waiting to see whether they're going to finish it across James and John's Island and finish the loop. And then they're going to expand some of the lanes on 526 coming from West Ashland. And I think ultimately they'll do it going towards Mount Pleasant. But that's not going to do any, I mean, that's going to help, right? But that's not going to really address totally alleviate the congestion that we see on our interstates. And so what we've got to do in this area is start thinking about how can we promote the public transportation system that we currently have in place and make it more efficient, and also make it to something that people want to ride, and that we get rid of the stigma that riding public transportation is reserved for a person or persons of certain socioeconomic status, and that's not the case. And so we've got to be able to encourage ridership, whether it's on our bus with CARTA, and then ultimately as we start to develop and explore alternative modes of transportation, which is why I'm excited about the BRT. And so we've got to be able to think innovatively as we go forward in 2019, 2020 and beyond about how our transportation, because you can read the reports out there, you can talk to experts in the field, and there's this idea that if we continue at the rate that we're doing, we've been going down and not really making any meaningful change, then we're approaching gridlock very soon. And we need to do something about that. I mean, you give a prime example when the Wando Bridge fiasco happened several weeks ago. Right. And you saw the impact that had. And not only that, they were doing, just something that they were doing some work on Interstate 26. So you had the Wando Bridge, and then in conjunction with some work that was being done on the 26, it was impossible to get anywhere around Charleston for several hours in the morning. Right. And I remember they were already talking about, traffic getting and Mageddon and all that on Twitter and all the social media platforms on that particular day because of the issues. And so, you saw at that point the height of what it could be. And that, imagine that every day in Charleston. People would go crazy. It would be very, very difficult to live in the city. So we've got to really do everything we can. I think it's a multifaceted approach. Yes, we need to, I think, yes, ultimately we need to do what we can to address whether we're going to extend 526 or not. I think we certainly, I'm glad that we're doing the expansion of the lanes on 526 going in both ways. And then I'm excited about the BRT. So, it's from a roads perspective and the highways, it's about alternative modes of transportation with the BRT and making sure we've got something like that's sustainable going forward. And then it's also about taking care of what we've got in place, which is our CARTA bus system, and making sure that we encourage people and make it to something that people want to ride, that it's easy access. And something that people, as they go along, will say, in Charleston, I don't necessarily have to have a car to get around. And if I can take my car somewhere and then ride the bus, and it'll take me all the places that I need to go, and I can get back home at a decent time, and I'll feel good. I can save on money, and it really does everything it can, and at least try to alleviate a lot of the congestion that we've seen.
When you strip away the bus issue and obviously about public transportation, you bring back into discussion about infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Where is your confidence when it comes to the Department of Transportation?
I've got good confidence in DOT, and I'll tell you why. In my experience, and I've only been in the General Assembly for 1 year now, but I've reached out to them about several issues in my district, and they've been very responsive to those issues. Now, whether those responses have been to my liking, not all the time, but I understand how government works, and I understand that oftentimes you're not going to get an answer you like, but you get an answer nonetheless, and you move on anyhow. The one thing that I will say is that from a statewide perspective, I recognize that there's a growing number of South Carolinians that are frustrated with DOT. If you look at our roads and our highways and our bridges, you see that we've got a crisis. They're crumbling and they're not in good shape. And they don't allow people to travel freely in a timely and efficient manner to get where they need to go. And so part of that, and I've learned, is they're looking at DOT and they're saying, well, you need to make sure we need to fix our bridges. We need to fix our roads. We need to fix our highways. Fix it, fix it, fix it. And as the average citizen, of course, that's an easy thing to say, fix it, which is understood. But what I've learned is that you've got to look at, well, if we're going to fix it, that's one thing. We've got to make sure that there's money to do that. And where is that money coming from? Which is why I was excited when the General Assembly passed the gas tax increase last year. Even though I wasn't in it, I was certainly in favor of it, because for a long time, you've got all these projects around the state that need to be funded, and we got to fund them somehow. We've got to fund them somehow. For South Carolina at the time, and we hadn't had a gas tax increase in years, and so it was certainly needed. And the idea and the hope is that as we see the money start to come in from that, and we start to realize that on the tax increase, we're able to fund a lot of these projects. I think the frustration that you have with people, though, DOT serves the entire state, right? Well, there has to be a priority. And I know that a lot of the frustration that people have had is that, there may be something in rural South Carolina that people feel like isn't being prioritized over something that, like a major interstate, like let's say I-77 going out of Columbia, or even in here in Charleston with the I-526. So I can understand the people of South Carolina, their frustrations with DOT. I think they're doing the best that they can with what they have. My hope is that as we continue to hold them accountable and ensuring that they're living up to their obligations, that we as a General Assembly are equipping them with what they need in order to do the projects and go carry forward the projects that they have before them.
Describe to me the following in one word: your first year in the legislative session.
And experience.
Mubby Emanuel 3 years later.
Touching.
Your next year in office.
Eager.
Representative Marvin Pendarvis, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate this.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, man.
Likewise.